Today on Sports Around the Bar, we are going to be fixing the Washington Redskins, the second worst team in the NFL. As always, I am Jake, your bartender, and without further ado, let's get right into it. Before we go into what we need to do in free agency and what we need to do in the draft, first we need to look at this team as a whole and decide where our positions of weakness are and where our positions of strength are. It starts with the quarterback position. Dwayne Haskins, despite a rocky start for the Washington Redskins, actually had a pretty good end of the year. He did a pretty good job of progressing as a rookie, and that's exactly what you're excited to see. Now, I know we're not convinced that he can be the next great quarterback for the Washington Redskins, but with what he's shown through 2019, we need to believe that, hey, maybe with the right coaching and the right personnel around him, that he can take that next step forward and become a franchise-level quarterback. It starts with weapons. We need to add more weapons to this roster in order to do that. We're going to start by looking at our running backs, even though this is actually a position of strength for the Redskins. We have Adrian Peterson returning in 2020 now that we've picked up his contract option. We have Darius Geis, a highly rated running back that so far has run into an injury bug. Coming in behind him, we're going to actually use both of those guys in a rotation. Our biggest set of guys that we need to consider bringing back are our scat backs, the guys like Chris Thompson, guys like Wendell Smallwood. We need to look at those two guys and decide which one out of the two needs to return. Now, I know he's had an injury-plagued career, but to this point, I would say Chris Thompson is by far the better candidate to return. Even though he's 29, he's getting a little bit older, and he's had many injury-riddled seasons and injury-shortened seasons. I think he's your best option. When he's out there, he's still explosive. He makes things happen. He's the best receiving option out of the backfield we've had in Washington. We're going to bring him back on a short contract. We're going to give him a 2-year, $4.5 million contract where we're going to guarantee about 3 of it. This will ensure that we have some parity in the backfield, and when we get into those 3rd and 6, 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8 situations, we're going to have a running back that's going to be more capable of getting the first down than someone like Adrian Peterson or Darius Geis has shown to this point. We're going to keep Bryce Love around as our extra option, and we're going to carry 4 running backs into 2020. The others, like guys like Mike Burton, we may bring him back since he plays a bit of a fullback role depending on how much we plan to use it going forward. Right now, I don't really plan on bringing back a fullback for anything more than league minimum. If we need to, we can always go out and get another guy. And Wendell Smallwood with Chris Thompson returning is expendable. We're going to move on from him. Next, we shift over to wide receiver, where we have Terry McLaurin after a breakout year. One of the most dynamic rookie receivers we've seen in a while. We need to put other pieces around him that are going to help him flourish, because right now he is our number one option. Him and Dwayne Haskins have had a great rapport going back and forth to each other. I just think this needs to be a deeper wide receiver class. So when we target free agents, that's going to be one of our major concerns. I mean, we also drafted Kelvin Harmon last year. Wasn't as good, but he was, for a rookie, acceptable. We're going to give him another chance on the outside. Everyone else is pretty much expendable on this roster. Cam Sims, David Kidsey, Jester Way. All these guys aren't particularly special. Even guys like Trey Quinn that had a good flash for a couple games early on in the season didn't really finish the way we wanted it to. This is our biggest position of need on the offense, aside from the offensive line, where we're going to talk about our guys departing. Outside of that, we have tight ends. Jordan Reed is now going to be off the team here in the past couple days. They've announced that he won't be returning in 2020. We could target Austin Hooper. We could target someone like Hunter Henry out in free agency, although I think we're actually going to hold off. I don't know that either one of those guys are going to warrant the money they're going to wind up getting in free agency, so we'll talk about that a little bit later. For the most part, we're going to be relying on Jeremy Sprinkle. I know not ideal at the tight end situation, but either drafting a guy is going to be on our radar, or we're going to have to come up with a cheaper option in free agency. I just don't see it. Tight ends are very, very hard to build. We're going to have to try to bring in a cheaper or younger position player there with Jordan Reed departing. Next, we need to talk about our offensive line. This group has been one of the strengths for the Washington Redskins for years now. We need to talk about how we're going to secure that and bring our own players back for 2020. Brandon Sheriff, Eric Flowers, both of our guards are up on contract. Both have played particularly well. Brandon Sheriff especially. He's been one of the better guards in the NFL. Eric Flowers has been somewhere closer to average, but for continuity's sake, these guys have played together. He's played next to guys like Chase Roullier and Morgan Moses. We need to secure our own free agents. So we're going to offer Brandon Sheriff a 4-year, $70 million contract to stay as our right guard. He's actually going to become tied or just behind a couple other offensive guards as the highest paid in the NFL. I believe he'll actually be second behind Brooks for the Eagles after this contract. It's pricey, but and especially for a guy that you can't name off as one of the top 2 or 3 tackles, but he's been incredibly solid, both pass and run defending, or run blocking, I should say. He's been an incredibly effective talent. We need to bring him back. There's no doubt about that. As for Eric Flowers, we're going to offer him more closer to a 4-year, $14 million deal. He's going to get about $3.5 a year. We're going to guarantee 6 of that. That should secure our offensive line for years going forward. It is going to eat into our into our cap, but fortunately for us, we have about $62 million sitting in the bank where we can go after pretty much anyone we need to in the offseason. Staying with the offensive line, we also need to secure our backups because, again, even though we've had Trent Williams not play for an entire year, I think we need to offer another contract to Donald Penn, who coming in for him has been particularly good. He's been somewhere close to league average, but when you talk about a 36-and-a-half-year-old player, that's not a bad result. We're going to try to bring him back on a 1-year contract worth $2 million to secure our backup just in case we run through any injuries. Our strength has been protecting Dwayne Haskins and giving him time to grow and develop as a quarterback. We're going to make sure that is going to be the case in 2020 by bringing back guys like Donald Penn and Tony Bergstrom. Bergstrom, we're going to give a 1-year deal worth $1 million. Again, he hasn't been the most effective center, but he's been all right. We're going to bring him back as a depth guy, and just in case something happens to our starter, Chase Rallier, we're going to make sure that we have depth behind him that can step in and play at an adequate level and give our quarterback time to make decisions and make good plays, because I think that's key to the development of young quarterbacks. Moving over to the defensive side of the ball, we have one big decision on the defensive line, and that is Ryan Kerrigan, who we owe $11 million if he plays for the Washington Redskins this year. Our biggest decision comes in the fact that we don't owe him a single dime of that. None of it's guaranteed. We could move on from a guy who's been solid, but not necessarily elite, but we're paying that elite money too. I believe more than likely the Redskins will release him, and I think that's probably the right answer at this point. If he was playing, like one of the better defensive ends in the league, I'd say we just bite the bullet. We've got the money. We don't need it particularly this year, but we're getting average play from a way above average contract. We're going to let him go and recoup that $11 million into our budget for free agency. Now, losing Ryan Kerrigan, especially with as high of a draft pick as we have, isn't as big of a blow because everybody knows we're probably going to target Chase Young. Spoiler on later in the show. But we're going to actually shift over to a 43. We've been playing a 34 with Ron Rivera coming in. I think we're going to switch back to a 43. We're going to use Daron Payne and Jonathan Allen still as our defensive interior guys that are going to be playing in the middle of the defensive line. We're going to have Montez Sweat, and eventually we're going to have Chase Young playing on the other edge. That's a pretty good group. Even though we didn't have quite the same performances we were hoping out of them in 2019. 2020, I think we can expect more with savvy defensive minds coming in like Jack Del Rio and their head coach Ron Rivera. We should not have to worry too much about that defensive line. Instead, where we need to focus and what we need to worry about are actually our linebackers. Guys like Cole Holcomb, John Bostic have not particularly performed very well to this point. John Bostic is a free agent, and as much as I would rather let him go, I think we're going to, just for continuity's sake, bring him back on a 1-year, $1 million deal. The 29-year-old hasn't really had that good of a career. Overall, he had some spark when he got into the league. There was a lot of talk about him being the next Brian Urlacher and how explosive he could be. He never really lived up to that hype. And as much as I'd like to say we're ready to move on, we're ready to wash our hands and improve at the position, I just don't know that short of offering a massive contract to Corey Littleton, I just don't know that there is really a solution at linebacker that's going to be just plug and play, instantly fixed, and you don't have to worry about it. We'll go into that in just a second when we talk about free agents we should target, but before we do that, keep in mind that middle linebacker, especially now that we're shifting to a 43 or off-the-ball linebacker, if you prefer to look at it that way, is going to be incredibly important for us to address because now we're going to need 3 instead of just 2. Moving on to the rest of the defense, our cornerback situation is just as precarious. We have Fabian Moreau, who's likely to be back as our starting corner, but he was subprime, I would say, in defense. We would like to upgrade off that position, but there's only so much you can address in one offseason. So instead, what we're going to do is promote Quentin Dunbar to a starting corner, played 11 games this year, actually had pretty good stats. If you look at it, he had 4 interceptions, he had a 68 quarterback rating against. That's pretty solid play from an outside cornerback. We're going to move him up as a full-time starter in our defense this year. We're going to pair him with Fabian Moreau, and we're going to work on depth because guys like Aaron Colvin, who have been terrible from last season, Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie, even Josh Norman, who's already off the team, all of our depth at outside corner is actually departing. So we're going to need to address that, and we're going to need to do something about it pretty quickly. We, at the very least, need to get depth in case something happens to one of these guys injury-wise for 2020. As for our nickelback position, we're going to have Jimmy Moreland return. We have Greg Stroman as well. Both of those guys were somewhere around average. Neither one particularly impressed, but with all the other needs, we don't really have a choice. They're going to have to play for us in 2020. And then let's talk about safety really quickly. Deshazier Everett did not have a great year. He had like 152 rating against. It was shortened by injury. He didn't play a lot of games, but we really need to address we don't really need to address safety because we have Troy Apke who played well coming in as his replacement. I think we're going to lean more towards playing Troy Apke as the starter. I think it needs to be an open competition between these two guys because Apke graded out very well. He was very effective in coverage, decent run support as well. Pairing him with Landon Collins, who was also very good coming off that big contract, is the backfield we want to have in our defense. I think having those two guys playing safety and then Deshazier Everett competing for a position or maybe coming in some more run defense situations, I believe will still be a pretty good back half of the secondary. So we need to address outside corner, we need to address off the ball linebacker, and we really are looking to get better at outside wide receiver. Those are our biggest needs, short of making sure that we get our own lineman back. Now, assuming we sign them, because we should, offering these guys the contracts we've given them, we should expect them to return for 2020 and our offensive line to still be one of our strengths. We're going to go into free agency. Okay, now that we have our team kind of squared away, we are going into free agency targeting only a couple positions. And the good news is, even after all of that we spent on Brandon Flowers and Eric Sharif, as well as our other backup linemen and Chris Thompson, we actually still have close to $40 million to spend in free agency. That number, even though some teams don't want to spend all of it, should not scare you because Alex Smith has an option in his contract coming up where we'll be able to remove him going into next season, going into 2021, and save about another $20-some million a year. So we have that potential out there. We don't need to be shy about spending any of this money. Our main target needs to be Amari Cooper. The reason I say that is because not only will you be robbing a divisional foe of one of their best players, but you're going to put another dynamic, both outside and inside available wide receiver into this offense with Dwayne Haskins. I know we're all not convinced that Dwayne Haskins is the guy going forward. The easiest way to find that out is to put amazing talent around him. I think what we need to do is offer Amari Cooper a game-breaking 5-year, $100 million contract for $68 guaranteed. Unfortunately, that's going to be the market value that he's going to go for is somewhere around $20 million a year. That being said, we have some other targets. Let's say we miss an Amari Cooper. He decides he doesn't want to be a Redskin. He wants out of the NFC East, something along those lines. Instead of targeting him, we could target Emmanuel Sanders. We could target Nelson Aguilar. We can go after one of those two guys to try to buff up this wide receiving group. Because right now, with Kelvin Harmon and Terry McLaurin as our only two options, per se, with Trey Quinn in the slot, we need to get better so we can find out exactly what Dwayne Haskins is going to be going forward. Because the worst case scenario is Dwayne Haskins is just okay, and we're not sure because we haven't put enough wide receiver weapons around him, and we spend the next 4 to 5 to 6 years wondering if he's the guy and kind of just flailing around, not really making any progress. The best thing we can do right now, build the offensive line, go to work with these running backs we have, bring in a guy like Amari Cooper or Emmanuel Sanders, top-tier, proven NFL talent, so that we can find out that either he is our quarterback of the future, as talking about Haskins, or he's not, and we need to move on and we need to draft somebody next year or try to sign a big-time free agent or work a trade. Now that we've targeted wide receivers, going to cornerback, we're actually going to go on the cheaper side of things. We just dropped $20 million on a receiver. We're going to try to save a little bit of that cap space and target Mackenzie Alexander from the Vikings. 26-year-old, he's played incredibly well, been on incredibly cheap contracts. I believe he's going to be a corner that can come in, play the outside for us. We're going to give him a 3-year, $10 million deal. He's been solid. He hasn't been a game breaker. He hasn't been elite, but I'm going to let him compete with Fabian Moreau. The best man wins that spot, and is going to play across from Quentin Dunbar. That's going to give us 3 outside corners, 2 in the slot that can play there. We're also going to look to add a later outside corner so that we have 6 on the roster. But for now, this is one of the bigger time signings we're going to go after. The other can come after the draft if we don't hit on a guy that we're looking for. After that, we're going to target middle linebacker or off-the-ball linebacker and sign Josh Bynes, 30-year-old from Baltimore. We're going to give him a 1-year, $2 million deal. Guy was fantastic for Baltimore. He's one of the highest-rated linebackers that only played in a short-term contingency. We're going to give him more of a starter role. We're going to try to play him about 50 or 60% of the snaps, have him come out in the nickel packages, and he's going to be a guy that's absolutely going to help us on our run defense. He's going to be decent in pass coverage as well. Again, guy was one of the highest-graded linebackers in the entire league. Played fantastically for the Baltimore Ravens. There's a good chance they re-sign him, but if he escapes, he's going to be one of those low-dollar targets in free agency that can make your team a lot better and not cost you a lot. So we know he's not the future. We know eventually we're going to need to draft a middle linebacker. We're going to address that in the draft. But for now, we're going to bring him in, and he's going to be that kind of slot-in, plug-and-play kind of guy that hopefully will help this defense, especially in the run defense, improve for 2020. Finally, for free agency, we're going to talk about Ryan Kerrigan and what replacement we're going to need, because if we are going to release him, I think it's important to have depth along the defensive line. A lot of our guys behind Montez Sweat haven't exactly impressed. Ryan Anderson has been somewhat below average. Nate Orchard was okay in a very, very limited role, but he's a free agent. We might not be able to bring him back. I think when we talk about Ryan Kerrigan departing, we actually have two options. If we stay at 34, which I don't believe we will with Ron Rivera coming in, but let's say we do for argument's sake, we should target Kyle Van Noy to come in and play that versatile linebacker role. We're going to offer him a 3-year, about $30 million contract, close to $10 million a year, and we're going to guarantee about 18 of it. I think bringing in a guy like Van Noy, that's a versatile linebacker, he can play off ball, he can rush the passer, and he can do so effectively, will be a good addition to this team if we stay at 34, but more than likely we switch to that 43. Our target instead should be Vinny Curry, leaving the Eagles. He's been outstanding. I think his age is what might scare some teams away from him, but we're going to offer him about a 2-year, $5 million deal to come in and be our rotational piece on this defensive line for when Chase Young or Montez Sweat needs a break. On to the draft. Let's talk about Chase Young coming in. This is a no-brainer. I know the Redskins have talked that, hey, we get the right pick, we get the right offer, maybe we trade that second overall pick to somebody who's looking for a quarterback and we get our guy a little bit later. I just don't see it happening. I don't see someone offering enough to trade up to the Redskins spot when you have the Lions that aren't likely to take a quarterback. You have the Giants who aren't likely to take a quarterback, all sitting behind them and probably very willing to deal their pick as well. So we're stuck picking Chase Young. I know, bummer. The highest graded edge rusher in recent memory coming out of college. We're going to bring him in. We're going to put him across from Montez Sweat and next to the two big Bama boys in Daron Payne and Jonathan Allen. And hopefully, under Ron Rivera's tutelage, we're going to have one of the better defensive lines in football. We're almost following the 49ers kind of blueprint, where you're going to build this defensive line by just spending picks and spending high picks and spending high picks, and eventually you'll become elite when you bring that much talent next to it. We're counting on the same thing happening for us. Now, we don't have a second-round pick. We traded it away for the Dwayne Haskins deal last year, so instead we're going to move on to the third round, and instead of names like before, I did a 2-round mock draft. I'd give you a name if we had a second-round pick. Instead of that, we're going to target positions. We're going to be looking for middle linebackers. Hopefully someone like Patrick Queen survives to this far. Hopefully maybe someone like Troy Dye slips down this far. We're going to try to address that position because even though we brought in a 30-year-old in Josh Bynes, we need plans for the future. We need to start taking these low-round pick shots at linebackers and hopefully get a cheap young player who can come in and make an impact right away. Beyond that, we need in the fourth round, we're going to target cornerback. This is another position that we need depth at. We need guys that can play the outside. We're going to look for that in the fourth round, but we're not married to this. Again, I'm going to say this on every one of these videos. It's important to draft the guys that are there, not draft based on need. Those are the positions we're going to be looking for. In the fifth round, we'll be looking for a wide receiver to further increase our depth in the 2 7th-round picks that we have since we traded away our 6 last year. We're going to target offensive tackle because both of our tackles are getting older, and we're going to eventually need to come up with another solution. We're going to take just a speculative pick on it, see what can happen, and we're also going to draft another edge rusher just for depth's sake. I know we brought in Vinny Curry. We're going to take another guy because you can never have enough guys rushing the passer. With that, we're talking about this defense that's massively rebuilt. We've got linebackers that are hopefully going to bridge the gap. We've got good safeties. We've got decent cornerbacks. We have an offense that should be ready to take a huge step forward with a totally rebuilt offensive line. Trent Williams returning from his holdout. New weapons at wide receiver with Amari Cooper, Terry McLaurin going into his second year. And then we also have a great group of running backs back there. There won't be any more excuses for Dwayne Haskins. I think we give him another 2 years, we see exactly what he can do, and then we make our decision from there. If he flames out, all of a sudden we're in the market for drafting a new quarterback. If he performs pretty well and we see that positive progression that we saw in 2019 continue, then all of a sudden the Redskins could be back and could be dangerous. Things are going to be better for them in 2020, I believe, because if you look at this offense coming back, they should at least be decent. this is a team that I think might really take the next step forward in 2021. As soon as that Alex Smith contract is off the books, as soon as they free up that 10% of their cap space that they're devoted to him, this team should be able to continue their upward climb and battle for a playoff spot in the NFC East.